And he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I'll give from the spring of the water of life, without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for the murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death." The idea of a fiery world of the dead is encountered in many cultures. The dead were believed to dwell in a realm of either fiery torment or cold, ghostly isolation. In modern literature, C.S. Lewis presents his concept of hell as a place of continuously growing isolation. Israel often saw its enemies falling upon them from the icy, often lifeless, and barren country of the north. And when viewed with the similarities of a desert, the north carried the same evil connotation. We have already witnessed how Dante placed his equivalent of the devil, Dis, in a frozen lake. In addition to the obvious physical associations of the barren lifelessness of the northern lands, the conceiving of the realm of evil as cold may also be due to personal experiences with evil. A common attribute of demonic possession is the perception of lowered temperatures in the vicinity of the possessed. Coldness has also entered our common language as we speak of our blood running cold in the presence of evil and terror. Equal to the attribute of cold has been the appearance of hell as filled with fire. The Egyptian Tuat, or hell, has been described as a place of torment and fire, as has the Greek and Roman Tartarus. One reason for this may be the association of caves and volcanoes with entrances to the underworld of the dead. During the voyage of St. Brendan, he and his sailor monks found themselves off the coast of a fiery island, which he identified with the entrance to hell. Literalists interpreting his story believe that he was somewhere near Iceland and its active volcanoes. It was in the proximity of this island that he encounters Judas Iscariot and carries on a conversation with him. For the Christian reader, the idea of a fiery end is even more cemented in the mind by Jesus' frequent referral to hell as Gehenna, a concept originating in the Old Testament. Gehenna became the name for the constantly flaming garbage pit outside the southeast wall of Jerusalem. Originally, it was not designated as a place for refuse, but became such after its use as a location for Israelites to practice pagan rites as described in 2 Chronicles, and also by the prophet Isaiah. At the time it was named the Valley of Ben Hinnom, or Ge Ben Hinnom, and it was here that Israelites worshipped the Canaanite gods of Molech and Baal, practices which included child sacrifice. King Josiah of Judah then proclaimed the valley defiled, identifying it as a place of evil, good only for disposing of what was unacceptable and vile. Taking these associations into consideration, the image of a lake of fire would have brought immediate recollection of the idea of Tartarus, Sheol's abode of the unrighteous, as well to mind. It is here that we encounter true hell. Earlier, as we were exploring the conceptions of the afterlife, we observed the confusion with regard to the conflation of the idea of the heaven of heavens with heaven in general. Here we encounter a similar confusion with the conflation of the underworld of the dead, and hell is symbolized as the lake of fire. What we are shown in John's vision is that no one goes to hell prior to the last judgment. At the death of the body, the unrighteous still apparently entered an intermediary state, symbolized by the underworld and the sea. This has been a common conception, as those who died on land were either buried in the ground, the underworld, burned, and their ashes given to that, or dying at sea, they were buried at sea. So we read that the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were within them. And only after they are presented before the seat of judgment are they relegated to the fire of hell. Even more specific than merely the fiery description of the lake is that of fire and brimstone. These images in tandem have been used throughout the Old and New Testaments as signs of God's judgment. It was fire and brimstone that fell upon Sodom and Gomorrah, whereas the image of fire alone also has carried the impression of holiness, as in the descent of the Holy Spirit. Brimstone is merely the archaic word for sulfur, and it is with this description that we gain a deeper understanding of what is meant here. In the context of God's judgment, fire often carries with it the attribute of purification. One is purified through fire as metal is refined in the same. Likewise, dross or impurity is removed by fire. The righteous are tested by fire. Now, adding brimstone to this image implies it amplifies it from mere purification to actually true fumigation. Sulfur was known for two remarkable qualities. As a solid mineral, it was believed to have fire contained within it, since sulfur could be ignited, thus the name brimstone. When ignited, it emits a poisonous gas and was used as an old world antiseptic or fumigator. If we were to view the image of the lake of fire as composed solely of fire, we may be led to see this activity as another form of transformation, much like the idea of refining or the mythical phoenix rising from the ashes. This might give license for believing that the lake of fire is God's manner for redeeming both the unrepentant sinner and the devil himself. Such thoughts would be in line with persons who ascribe to the concept of universal salvation. Jesus died for all, therefore all are saved. As well as such reputable early theologians as Origen and Gregory of Nyssa. However, the image presented here is of fire and sulfur. This, combined with the description of the eternal nature of torment, it said in our vision, the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur and will be tormented day and night forever and ever. This leaves little room for the sense of some new form of purification. Fumigation was not performed to transform vermin, but to kill them, and to rid their presence from a home or room. With this image, we are given the sense that the damned are neither transformed nor annihilated, but are placed herein as a form of decontamination of the new creation. The description of the activities that gain condemnation to the lake of fire is indicative of what it takes to get there. There it said, the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars. In other words, the ego-centered, self-interested person. Each of these descriptions is of a person who would always put themselves, their desires, and their needs before God and other people. This is in direct opposition to the great commandment to love God completely and neighbor as self. This egoistic activity must be kept separate from the realm of love inhabited by the completed, mature soul. From the outset, we have been exploring John's vision with an eye for its indications about the initiation of the soul into the consummate life, symbolized by the New Jerusalem. As such, we have been able to draw practical implications regarding the experience of the soul along this path. This vision, much of the New Testament, is not to be read as a book of theology, as much as it is as a story of salvation. Except for the portions of St. Paul's letter to the Romans and the letter to the Hebrews, there is little attempt in the Old or New Testaments to set out some form of modern systematic theology. Systematic theology became an academic subject much later in time. The Bible is comprised of stories which speak to us of experiences that we can replicate in pursuing the destiny God put before us. St. Paul's letters are better read as us listening to one side of a modern telephone conversation. For the most part, we can only guess at what is being asked, as we only hear his response. A response to a specific situation, and not one that he was probably thinking would be applied with broad brushstrokes. In this sense, the Bible as a whole, and the book of Revelation in particular, are better seen as vehicles for practical theology rather than philosophical theology. With this in mind, we are left with the lingering but unanswered question of theodicy. Even at the end of John's vision, there is no conclusive answer to how a good God not merely abides, but still contains evil. The story of the soul is one of entering into the life of God. But this does not equate with the full knowledge of God. God still stands outside the New Jerusalem, even though the New Jerusalem itself is filled with God. This sense of standing outside is seen both in the image of the city of God on the one hand and the lake of fire outside it on the other hand, with a God that contains both. Likewise, the city of God is not the completeness of the heaven of heavens, as the New Jerusalem was seen as descending from the Empyrean. Some thinkers have posited that the New Jerusalem is similar to a Buddhist nirvana, or the coming into cosmic consciousness of the Hindu. These similarities are put to rest as both the Hindu and the Buddhist see such a state as not as one becoming united with God, but rather as realizing that you are God. They would use the common illustration of being a drop of water entering an ocean, where there is now no differentiation between the drop and the ocean. The fullness of God still here for us remains aloof from the soul. But now the soul experiences as much fullness as it was capable of according to its destiny. Does God come to redeem those in the lake of fire at some later time or in some alternate dimension? Certainly Origen thought so, and the term apokatastasis has been applied to those who argue for the belief that in a final end, God should be all in all, and that all would return to the knowledge of God. For us, we can go no further in answering this question. It is left to the realm of the philosopher. Our interest has been in the interpretation of a dream for the Apostle John. In any dream interpretation, there is the temptation to diverge into philosophical ponderings. However, an appropriate approach to a dream is to respect what it has presented, and neither add to it nor subtract, but deal with what is presented. John's vision actually provides us just this admonition. It ends with, "I warn everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues described in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away his share in the tree of life and in the holy city, which are described in this book." And so it is that we are left with these lingering questions, the answers to which God appears uninterested in giving. What is important, therefore, is not an attempt to develop further conceptions regarding the metaphysical depths of God, but in putting our energy into understanding and accomplishing the living out of our destiny. This is what has been placed before us in this vision, the vision given to John. And it is this that is to determine the manner in which we expend the energy of our life.